Good morning. Welcome to the Board of Registered Nursing Committee meeting. It is August 24th, 2023, and we will take roll call to establish a quorum. My name is Dolores Trujillo, and I was appointed by the governor to represent the direct care provider role, and I am current president of the board. Jovita Dominguez.
Good morning. My name is Jovita Dominguez, and I was appointed by Governor Newsom in the Education and Licensing Committee.
Thank you. Patricia Nguyen.
Good morning, Tricia Nguyen. I was appointed by Governor Newsom in the public member role.
Thank you. David Lawler.
Good morning. I'm David Lawler. I was also appointed by Governor Newsom in the public member role.
Thank you, David. Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz, I'm a public member appointed by President of the Senate pro tempore, Tony Atkins.
Thank you, Vicki. And our newest member of the board, Allison Cormack.
Good morning, Allison Cormack. I was appointed by the previous Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon, in the public member role.
Thank you, Allison, and welcome. And our executive officer, Loretta Melby.
Thank you. I'm Loretta Melby, or Lori, and I'm the board's executive officer appointed by the board.
Thank you, Lori. And our board counsel, Reza Pejihesh.
Good morning, everyone. Reza Pejuhesh, BRN Legal Counsel. Can I ask a quick question, Dolores? I think Lori said we had one person show up, a public member of the public in San Diego. We don't necessarily need a count, but are there members of the public there in the Sacramento location in person?
Yes.
Okay. That'll just help to know for going around public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we've established a quorum. We will now move to item 2.0, and this is the general instructions for the format of a teleconference call. BRN moderator.
Good morning. This is the BRN moderator. I will be moderating the meeting. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. When the board reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, the question and answer feature will be turned on, and members of the board can indicate that they would like to make a comment by inserting the phrase, "I would like to make a comment," in the question box, which is typically in the lower right of your screen. We will also query the two locations to see if there are public comment. I will then call on the individual and unmute their microphone, or the individual in person. The individual will have 2 minutes to make their comments. I will not give a warning as your time approaches. I will mute your microphone and will announce that your time has exceeded the time allotted. I will then proceed to the next member of the public who has a comment. Please note that the question and answer feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. When your turn comes, you will be prompted to unmute. If your question can be answered, the board will respond accordingly. When making your comment, speak about anything you believe is important for the members to know. Remember, board members cannot address any item not on the agenda. Items not on the agenda at that moment, or items that you would like to add to a future meeting or that will be discussed later on in the agenda, will be discussed at their correct times during the meeting. I will provide a brief reminder of this approach at the start of each public comment item. Finally, when the board or BRN staff are not speaking, I would like to remind them to mute their microphones. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will mute your microphone. I will mute your microphones for you automatically. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3.0, public comment for items not on the agenda and items for future agenda. BRN moderator.
We will be opening for public comment now. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. If you are in person at either one of the locations, please raise your hand or let somebody know you have a public comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment," or letting your location know you have a comment. Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, I would like to make a comment. Shelly Zappas would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hello, thank you. I am Michelle Zappas, or Shelly Zappas. I am a program director at the University of Southern California in the MSN FNP program. I would like CCR section 1484, Nurse Practitioner Education F and G, regarding out-of-state students and preceptor requirements to be placed as an agenda item for review and input from NP program directors with enrolled out of state students and preceptors, perhaps regulatory change. CCR sections 1484 F and G are now being interpreted that out-of-state enrolled students must hold California RN licensure, and their out-of-state preceptors must hold California RN licensure and California NP, NPF, even though these individuals are not physically located in state for classes or clinicals and are not caring for California residents. NP programs are being asked to update enrollment and preceptor requirements for entering students. This new interpretation of CCR section 1484 F and G will negatively impact California-based NP program enrollments going forward, particularly online and hybrid programs. Not only will they impact NP student enrollment, but they will also affect the program's ability to obtain and maintain quality preceptors. As you are aware, finding appropriate preceptors for our NP students is a national problem. This added hurdle will mean that preceptorships will be even more difficult to obtain and maintain. It is requested that these regulations be reviewed. Should California require out-of-state students to obtain an RN licensure in this state, the board should consider the following: joining the Nursing Compact. California is currently not a member of the Nursing Compact and has no future implementation legislation planned. If California joined the compact, that would eliminate the application-related challenges, fees, processing time, etc., for students and preceptors. Potentially eliminating or reducing the application fees. This new requirement will result in additional application fees for students, which could be extremely burdensome and punitive. Reducing the application review approval processing time for RN licensures. Given that the application review approval time usually takes several months in most states, California should consider ways to reduce the processing time so that students can comply with the state's new interpretation and requirement within a reasonable time frame. Revising the renewal obligations and fees for RNs. California RN licenses are active for 2 years. If a student is not a full-time student, they may need to renew their license within the course of the program, and that may create an additional restriction or delay in student outcomes if the student has to pause their matriculation due to licensing issues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Bobby Dalton G. Roy would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Good morning. My name is Bobby Roy. I am the Bargaining Unit 21 Chair of SEIU Local 1000. Local 1000 recently reached a tentative agreement on its successor contract with the state. Among the negotiated topics were the wages and working conditions of the nursing education consultants, 8 of whom currently work for your board in arduous conditions with a 41% vacancy rate. In negotiations, we proposed a recruitment and retention differential to help alleviate the vacancy rate. It was rejected. We proposed a special salary adjustment to rectify an existing pay inequity with other RNs in comparable positions. That was partially rejected because the state wanted to see what 5% could do with respect to attracting more candidates. Try as we might to warn that 5% was not enough, the state would not budge. So here we are. You will receive a BRN fund analysis later showing 14.9 months in reserves, in excess of its 6-month goal. Despite the vacancy rate and NECs filing arduous pay grievances, the state will not mobilize a fraction of these funds to do the right thing and invest in the greatest resource it has, its workforce. NECs are marketable and RNs are in high demand in a time when we have low supply. Basic economics tells us that high demand and low supply means high prices. But can we put a price on our healthcare system? Nurses are the backbone of our healthcare system, and if the state doesn't pay our NECs their market value, they will not come, they will leave, and there won't be anyone to provide consultation to new or existing nursing programs. How would the public react if the state continued to collect fees for services that they cannot provide in an effective, timely, and safe manner? Not investing in our NECs would be catastrophic for the BRN, the DCA, California, and California's healthcare system. I urge this body to compel the BRN and DCA to follow CalHR's HR Manual Section 1715 and submit an employee compensation request that makes a meaningful attempt at fixing the arduous working conditions our NECs are in. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comments on the WebEx. Are there any public requests for comments there at HQ1?
No requests for comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Board EO Melby, are there any public requests for comments there in San Diego?
There are no public requests for comments here as well.
Thank you. Board President Trujillo, there are no more public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Moving on to item 4.0, review and vote on whether to approve previous meeting minutes. These are the minutes for May 17th through 18th, 2023, and the minutes for June 29th, 2023. Is there any comment from the Sacramento board members that are present? Allison?
Thank you, Chair Trujillo. I just want to mention in advance that I'll be abstaining from this vote, given that I was not present for these meetings.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any comments from San Diego?
There are no comments from San Diego.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to accept the board minutes from May 17th through 18th, 2023, and June 29th, 2023, and allow BRN staff to make non-substantive changes to correct name misspellings and/or typos that may be discovered in the document.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Can we open it up for public comment, please?
We will be opening for public comment now. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in the request for comment, or in the locations, please raise your hand. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment," or you can raise your hand at your location. Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comments on the WebEx. Are there any public requests for comments there at HQ1?
No public requests for comment here in Sacramento.
Thank you. Board EO Melby, are there any public requests for comments in San Diego?
Lori, I think you were muted when you were speaking.
Probably. There are no requests for public comments in San Diego.
Thank you. Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comments in the remote location or on the WebEx. I'm sorry. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, we'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Reza. Can I just make a special request for, in general, voting, commenting or asking questions? If we could have the board members state your name first before you go into your question, comment, or vote, just for our note takers to be able to jot that down more easily. That would be appreciated.
Thank you, Reza. This is Dolores Trujillo, and I vote yes. Jovita Dominguez,
Jovita Dominguez votes yes.
Patricia Nguyen,
Tricia Wynn votes yes.
David Lawler,
David Lawler votes yes.
Vicky Granowitz.
Sure. Oh, Vicky Granowitz votes yes.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Moving
Chair,
on.
Chair Trujillo,
Yes.
may I add my abstention in the formal process?
Thank you, Allison.
Okay, Allison Cormack, I abstain.
Thank you. All right, item 5.0, report of the administrative committee. Lori?
Thank you. So as the board executive officer, we've had a couple updates in the last few months since the prior board meeting. I traveled with our board president to the National Council of State Boards of Nursing and 45th annual meeting located in Chicago. I participated in a work group that met with members of the World Health Organization to discuss healthcare coverage and nursing throughout the world in the futures to come. It was a brainstorming session. We also attended an information session on the National License Compact, the Nursing License Compact. I apologize for misstating that. And then several keynote speakers throughout the meeting. Additionally, we had some further meetings on updates from Operation Nightingale with the fraudulent nursing programs primarily coming out of Florida. I also met with California Hospital Association and provided a presentation. We are planning on in October, so before the next board meeting, the nursing education consultants, myself, the chief of legislation, the chief of licensure, and potentially our board president, Dolores Trujillo, will be attending the COADN meeting located in Monterey. And so we're all looking forward to that. Additional meetings that I've held, I've met with various leaders throughout the UCSD system, working on implementation of the 103 NP, or the nurse practitioner that can now operate without standardized procedures in a group setting. I've also met with the California Association of Nurse Practitioners, as well as the APRN Coalition, to continue to work throughout updates and trying to align with that. I did meet with some lobbyists around some enrollment approvals, enrollment reductions, potentially, and enrollment increases, just kind of discuss process. And I've always also met with various legislative staffers to discuss any kind of issues or questions that anybody has brought forward to them. Additionally, we did hire a nursing education consultant for the BRN enforcement NEC. She is up and trained, and she is doing job approvals and course approvals, etc., And that is a position that had previously been covered from a retirement since December by myself. And so I'm happy to move away from that. Additionally, we hired a retired annuitant NEC for the continuing education position in our continuing education and research unit. And that was another position that was covered by me as well in the vacancy, and he is up and going in independent, working on that. So the vacancy rate for the NECs are decreasing, but we do still have multiple vacancies within the pre-licensure program approval and the nurse practitioner approval processes. And that is why that public comment was made earlier. So I did want to give you guys an update on the hiring for NECs and let you know that there are still vacancies within the school or pre-licensure NECs. Additionally to that, we are pursuing with Office of Human Resources with DCA reorganization so that we can work to fill some of our vacancies. We not only have vacancies within the NECs, but we do have other vacancies within our board, and we do need to realign. So we are pursuing that. And we meet on a regular basis with DCA for guidance on that as we move forward. We are considering several options. We have elicited feedback from the executive team as well as various leadership positions within the individual units. In addition to that, we did get some monies allotted to us through HCI for nursing licensure, and that went to us, BRN, as well as BVNPT. And there is a strike team that has been issued, and our assistant executive officer, Yvonne Leonard Taps, is leading that. She's an amazing asset to this team, and I'm sure that she will have that, and we will start to see some incredible benefits with that. She is also working closely with our chief of licensing, Macaulay Fusarins, who will ensure that this is carried out, the licensing improvements are inputted, and they are maintained. That is something that we're very much looking forward to. DCA has also promised us that we will receive some IT updates so that things can move faster with some tech assistance. And so that is something that we're very, very happy to undertake as well. Similarly to the Enlighten License project that we volunteered to be a part of the last year as the BRN, DCA is also embarked on what they're calling an Enlightened Enforcement project. They are looking at aligning as many boards and bureaus as possible underneath them. Our deputy chief of, our chief of enforcement, Shannon Johnson, has been recruited to join that team and share her expertise. So I am incredibly excited about that, and we'll see how that does moving forward and what the various options are for our boards and bureaus under DCA to look at improving and streamlining our enforcement process. Other than that, that is my update for the executive officer report, and I'm available for questions from our board.
Tricia Nguyen.
Thanks very much, Lori. That's a great report. Just to circle back on the question about NECs, and our vacancy rate and filling it and the recruitment, I'm glad to hear that you're being so proactive about it. But could you tell us, are we paying a competitive rate for that very important role?
We are not. We've made that very clear in our sunset reports over the last few years. As everybody is absolutely aware, I used to be a nursing education consultant for our board starting in 2014. And I actually, for full transparency, worked with the union requesting a raise when I was an NEC because the pay is not in alignment with their education, with their training, with their experience, or even with their role as an RN. There are new grads being hired into Sutter Health coming out at about $150,000 a year. And that's not even close to what our NECs make. It is public information. You can find what their pay rate is by searching CalHR and looking up their job title. And they are under, I believe, Unit 17's bargaining unit. So you'd be able to see that there is a huge disparity. Many of them look at picking up a second job. That is difficult since this job is a full-time position and requires a lot of work. Additionally to that, we have had some turnover and some retirements. A lot of the NECs rely on their partner for an additional income. And along with that, we do tend to get people that have either retired that are collecting a pension that would then supplement the income that is received for the NEC. We have worked with DCA, we've worked with the Office of Human Resources. As the EO and the BRN, we do have the budget. We have been supportive of the pay increase requests that have gone through. And we did also hear that the potential agreement was much lower than what we had anticipated. And we do have a plan in place to move forward with requesting additional supplemental salary to our NECs through the BRN, separate from this bargaining contract, if this bargaining contract does not lead them to a competitive wage. We also believe that 5% is not competitive at all. And there are some people that have stated that they've had to take $40,000, $50,000 in annual pay cut in order to come to the board to do this important public service.
Thank you very much, Lori. If there's anything that board members can do to support your efforts, I would love for you to let us know as we go forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think anything, just kind of, we've done our best here to get it out into sunset reports so that legislative staff are aware, as well as the governor. We have met with several people over the years to try to get this out. I'm not sure what the path forward is right now. I will share that there was additional salary increases that were requests from other employees that were denied from CalHR. And we did meet with DCA to try to discover what was going on with that. And what was stated from DCA is that CalHR reached out to the governor's office, and it was still decided to move forward with either not doing a pay increase at all or not granting what was requested. An example would be a 3% request increase, and it came back from CalHR that they would only do a 2% increase. So not sure exactly what's going on over with CalHR or with the governor's office and anything, but if anybody feels so inclined to reach out, I know that our board president had made mention that she was considering reaching out to the governor as well.
Thank you, Lori. Any other comments, Allison?
Allison Cormack. Thank you, Chair Trujillo, and thank you, Ms. Melby, for your report. I'll just, pile on the issue with vacancies and paying people appropriately for their experience and the work we're asking them to do. So appreciate the suggestion there. I just wanted to pick up on the Enlightened Enforcement project that you mentioned. And as a new member, just starting, I'm very interested in learning more and happy to see that that's being considered, at a time in our nation when we're thinking more about restorative justice and using mediation as a way to resolve problems and conflicts and providing advocacy services for everyone. I think this is a real opportunity for us to move forward. So I want to just add my voice to the importance of us doing that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Are we ready to move on?
It is an agenda item, so we would have to go out to public comment, but it is
Okay.
information only, so there is no vote that needs to be taken.
Great. BRN moderator, can you please take us to public comment?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating. Sorry. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. Also, in the locations of Sacramento and San Diego, please let us know if you have public comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comment. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired and will move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment," and we will circle to the locations as well.
As they type in, I just want to let you know that there is no public comment in San Diego.
Thank you. Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests on the WebEx. Board EO Melby has stated there are no public requests for comment in San Diego. Are there any public requests for comments in Sacramento?
There does not appear to be any request for public comment here in Sacramento.
Thank you. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, 5.2. This is information only, 2022 to 2023, or 2025, excuse me, strategic plan and goal progression.
Yes, thank you. So the strategic plan has been updated as part of our board materials. It has been mentioned that potentially it is not clear to know what the new additions are. So I did want to let you know that the plan for the next board meeting when we do update would be to include potential highlights to the updated sections, as well as placing dates for completion for ease of review. I do apologize for that. I know that when you look at a document several times throughout the day as part of your normal work, that you tend to overlook some of that because it's a very familiar document. And we want it to be absolutely clear for our stakeholders as well as our board members. So we have had some continued updates to our strategic plan, and we do plan to continue to work forward to completion with the goal of 2025 as projected. If you have any questions specifically on the strategic plan, I am available for questions, and we can open that up to that right now.
Patricia Nguyen.
Hi, thanks very much, Lori. A very nice job on this. I know the dates would help, so I look forward to that for our next board meeting. But for now, I mean, this is just a very comprehensive and complete strategic plan. I sit on a number of boards and we all do strategic plans, but this one I think is just particularly helpful in terms of its specificity and direct steps that you're taking. So I always enjoy reading this and to see the progress that the BRN is making toward some pretty lofty goals. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the goals are quite lofty, and I don't even think that this catches everything. So we are continuing to move forward. I have heard reports from several stakeholders that they believe the BRN is in a better position than it's ever been. And so I love to just thank our BRN staff that works so hard, all the way from answering phones from people that come in that are very upset to working with enforcement, with probationers and nurses that are choosing our intervention program, that are going through a very difficult time, and our licensing staff that works diligently to get as many licensees into California as possible. One of the biggest things that when we're looking at numbers, I don't think that it accurately portrays the increased workload that the BRN has taken on. If you look at licensing numbers from, early COVID, we were getting about 20,000 students and about 10,000 endorsement apps. So about 30,000 RNs being newly licensed on an annual basis into California. Since COVID, with all the enrollment increases and with nurses endorsing in, our licensees, from exam has increased to between 20 and 30,000, and our endorsements went from 10,000 to 40,000. So we have the most RNs that we've ever had. And even with that, the timeframes have decreased exponentially. We do still have a lot of work to do, and we've been working very diligently to streamline that. Even with enforcement, I did mention in the EO report the Enlightened Enforcement Project, but that doesn't even begin to touch on all of the improvements that are going on with that. We do have the Organizational Improvement Office from the Department of Consumer Affairs that are working with us from the time that a complaint is received all the way to fruition. They're mapping out every single process. They're finding areas that we can improve on immediately. They're doing could be maps that we can look at for future. And additionally, when Shannon Johnson was promoted into her position, she really took a proactive approach to look at all aspects within enforcement and work towards streamlining that. Additionally, we do have a new supervising, SSI 2 in our investigations, Nicole, and she brings a ton of wealth. She is brand new to us, but the process improvements that she's already identified have been incredibly helpful. And so we will be opening up investigations and looking at those processes and working through that. So a lot of work, even that's stuff that's not on this strategic plan, just because this was made a few years ago, and things are constantly in flux.
Thank you, Lori. Any other requests for comments by the board members? No? Any requests for comment from the public members here?
We would have to open up to public comment, Dolores, so that everybody gets an equal time. So if no motion is needed, this is information only. So if we do want to open up to public comment, we can have our board moderator open it up and give San Diego, Sacramento, and our virtual attendees a possibility to make comment on this.
Thank you, Lori. BRN moderator, will you please open it up for public comment?
We will be opening for public comment now. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. In the locations of San Diego and Sacramento, we will be asking you. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment on the WebEx. Board EO Melby, are there any public requests for comments in San Diego?
There are no public requests for comments in San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you. Board President Trujillo, are there any public requests for comments in Sacramento?
Sorry, there are no public requests for comment here in Sacramento.
Thank you. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Item 5.3, this is information only. This is the Registered Nursing Fund Condition, and this is a presentation by DCA Budget Office.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good morning. My name is Suzanne Balkis, and I'm a budget analyst with the DCA Budget Office. I want to thank the board and the executive staff for allowing me time to present the board's fund condition statement. I'll be presenting the board's fund condition that we currently have FM12 projections included into. Please refer to page 33 in agenda item 5.3 in your meeting material. For prior year, which is 22-23, we have FM12 projections included into. The board have a beginning balance of about 56 million, projected total revenue of about 80 million coming in, and we are tracking an overall projected FM12 expenditure of about 64 million. With that expenditure and revenue, we have a fund balance of about 73 million, which give you about 13.1 months in reserve. For current year, which is 23-24, which is based on Budget Act, the board have a beginning balance of about 73 million, projected total revenue of about 79 million, and we're tracking an overall expenditure of about 67 million. With the expenditure and revenue, we're estimating a fund balance of about 85 million, which is about 14.9 months in reserve. Budget year is based on governor's budget, and budget year +1 is based on realize. We are also projecting loan payback of about 30 million in 24-25 from the general fund. We have no concern for this fund. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Allison?
Thank you, Board Chair Trujillo, and thank you, Ms. Balkis, for your report. I wouldn't say that I have a lot of questions, but I'm interested in the board understanding more about the budgetary situation. You know, the sources and uses of the funds. It's important in the long run that those match. The variability and the, number of applications and endorsements over the past, 5 years, even before COVID is pretty substantial. We've heard about the challenging employment situation we have in some areas. And of course, the loan will be repaid in, it quite soon from a standpoint. I think you mentioned prior that 12 to 24 months is what you prefer to see in terms of available funds, but it just strikes me that given how much progress the BRN has made in the past couple of years in operations, this might be a good time to perhaps have a small group of us work with the executive officer and whoever else would be appropriate just to dig into this a bit, while people are catching their breath and think forward. So I'd certainly be interested and happy to spend some more time on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Any other comments or requests from the board?
Board President just lets you know that if the board does choose to move forward with that, we would have to agendaize the formation of a subcommittee on the November agenda, and then vote for volunteer members, ask for volunteer members, and then vote on that in that November board meeting.
Thank you, Lori. No further comments from the board? Okay, can we open it up for public comment?
We will be opening it for public comment now. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. We will query Sacramento and San Diego. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate if they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired and will move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, I would like to make a comment.
As they type in, I wanted to let you guys know that there's no public comment in San Diego on this item.
Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment on the WebEx. Board EO Melby states there are no public requests for comments in San Diego. Are there any public requests for comments in Sacramento?
There are no public requests for comment here in Sacramento.
Thank you. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Next on the agenda is item 5.4. This is also information only. Presentation by the National Council of State Nursing Boards, NCSBN, on the new nursing shortage report.
And Brendan is in the attendees. Can he be elevated, please? And can you check his audio? I do see him.
You want to do an audio check there, but there you go.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. So not support WebAgger here at NCSBN, so I was troubleshooting both downloading the app and trying to log in through the browser, and I found that I was not able to find a share button on the browser. So here I am through the app. So I'm very pleased to be here. I very much appreciate the invitation to speak here today regarding the findings of our National Nursing Workforce Survey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to share my screen and we'll kick off. Give me 1 second.
It's okay. It's a dry run for your November presentation.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Let's make sure.
Awesome. Showing on our end.
Okay, perfect. So hello and good morning, everyone. I missed a little bit the introduction as I was kind of toggling between the browser and the app, but just to reiterate, my name is Brendan Martin and I am the Director of Research at the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. And I'm very happy to be here today, at least virtually, obviously, with the travel. But to briefly really discuss the ongoing work that we are doing at NCSBN regarding both the current and really the future U.S. nursing workforce. Before I kick off my remarks today, though, I would be remiss if I did not give due credit to someone who you are likely very familiar with, which is Richard Smiley. He is the principal investigator for the National Nursing Workforce Survey at NCSBN since 2015. But without further ado, let's just jump right in. So for today's presentation, I really wanted to cover a few major points. I know you have a set agenda, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I am going to be providing some moments at the end for any questions or clarification that you find necessary. And I will also share my contact information. The executive officer, Loretta Melby, is in constant contact with me. We have a wonderful working relationship. So in the event that you do have follow-up beyond the confines of today's presentation, I would welcome that outreach in any future collaboration. But to start, I'm going to provide a bit of background on NCSBN's research department, very, very briefly, with a particular focus on the work that we have conducted for much of the past 2 to 3 years. And then I'll use that discussion as a springboard to highlight one of our studies in particular, and that is the National Nursing Workforce Survey, to give you all the necessary context for why we wanted to pursue that study in the first place, and ultimately what we hoped to achieve. I'll then share a brief overview of the study methodology so that you are clear on how we selected our sample, went about collecting the data, and then ultimately analyzed the responses, before I'll get into the core of the presentation, in which I'll attempt to cover the results in some manner of detail, but obviously not too deep into the weeds given time allowances this morning. But I will wrap things up with a few key takeaways so that you are very clear on what we feel were the particular insights that emerged out of this analysis. And then, as I mentioned, I'll leave time at the end for any questions that you might have. So first of all, who are we? Many of you are likely very familiar with NCSBN. For those who are not, one of NCSBN's many goals is to be a leader in nursing regulation research. And so what does that encompass? The short answer is lots. We publish the Journal of Nursing Regulation. We administer a multi-million-dollar grant program focused uniquely on issues and topics related to nursing regulation. And we run a biennial scientific symposium during which we bring leading professional regulators, academics, policymakers, and industry thought leaders together to discuss timely and relevant research. During our day job, though, we also pursue a broad range of studies on pretty much any and all topics related to nursing regulation. So such topics could include pre-licensure nursing program approval, nurse discipline, APRN scope of practice, et cetera, et cetera. Really the big takeaway is that the list goes on and on. Importantly, though, this list often does not include research on the NCLEX. There is a separate department for that within NCSBN, and so there's oftentimes kind of a partition as it relates to that particular topic. In total, we are a team of 6. I myself have a background in education, public health, and clinical trials, but our team also includes decades of experience in governmental and nonprofit areas, and then with diverse skill sets ranging from applied statistics, that's really the core skill set that we recruit to, but also as of late with advances in machine learning, we look for folks who are trained in natural language processing as the data become increasingly complex. So while our annual research agenda typically includes anywhere between 30 to 40 active studies, in early April 2020, we began to recognize the potential for the broad effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on nursing. And so we counseled together as a research department to plan a targeted and expansive research agenda focused exclusively on the pandemic. In real time, this was our singular focus. As we look back retrospectively, this was really one of our primary responsibilities and our primary focus areas for the past 2 to 3 years. The agenda, as you can see from the slide in front of you, included over 10 applied research studies of different scopes, designs, and timelines. We really wanted to focus on an array of topics. So again, education, early career and APRN practice, and workforce trends. But the big takeaway was that we wanted to try as best as possible, obviously, with limited resource availability, to capture the impact of the pandemic on every level of nursing. One of the principal and therefore most critical studies assessing the impact of the pandemic on the profession is the National Nursing Workforce Survey, which I'll get into the details of that now with the remainder of the presentation. For those who are not familiar, since 2013, NCSBN has partnered with the National Forum of State Nursing Workforce Centers to collect timely and accurate supply-side U.S. nursing workforce data. Our stratified random sampling approach allows us to derive population-weighted and national estimates, projecting the observed trends that we see at all levels of the workforce, from licensed practical and vocational nurses up to advanced practice registered nurses across all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Our biennial data tracking, so every 2 years, really allowed us to bookend the height of the pandemic with amazing precision. So what do I mean by that? We were in the field and had kicked off a formal data collection in February 2020. So as we all kind of think back to that period of time, that means we were in active data collection prior to the formal announcement of the onset of the pandemic within the United States. We remained in the field for active data collection for the first 4 to 5 months as the pandemic spread across the country. We then, because of our 2-year cycle, so this is historic, this isn't necessarily in response to the pandemic specifically, we administered our survey again beginning in April 2022. We realized at that moment in time, and I think we're only growing more confident in it, that did in effect kind of almost bring closure to kind of the emergency phase, so to speak, of the pandemic. And after repeated surge events, which continued to disrupt many aspects of our professional and personal lives, obviously. But with both cycles, we were able to capture complete data for the nursing workforce across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and select US territories. For the instrument itself, we prioritize really the core of the survey instrument is composed of the minimum data set. So those are those standardized data elements regarding individual nurses' demographic and professional characteristics that we attempt to kind of capture across the entire country. But then we also add several custom survey items to our particular instrument related to telehealth, the Nurse Licensure Compact, future retirement plans, travel nursing, and direct patient care. Those are fairly consistent in terms of us administering the survey. So what I mean by that is we try as best as possible not to make too many tweaks to the custom elements because it somewhat defeats the purpose of the kind of longitudinal tracking of some of these trends. Where we deviated from that a little bit in 2022 was obviously between our design of the survey in 2020 and our design of the survey in 2022, the COVID-19 pandemic had occurred. So what we decided to do is we decided to append to our survey 3 custom elements related to nurses' specific experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so you'll see a lot of the results in particular as we project forward, both kind of the current state of the workforce and then looking ahead for data points related to intent to leave or retire. Some of those elements were new for the 2022 cycle. So the 2022 National Nursing Workforce Survey, which is the primary focus of today's presentation, took the form of a mixed modes survey study. So what do we mean by that? It has been a mixed mode survey study since we originally took over this project in 2013. We leverage historically both direct mail, so direct, like literally, we send you a paper-based survey, and email outreach since 2013. What was new this past cycle is we also incorporated data collected systematically through NCSBN's Nurses eNotify system. So the Nurse eNotify tool is a free online tool linked to the Nurses Licensure database, through which a nurse can self-enroll to receive reminders and updates to keep their professional license or licenses up to date. When they register their account, they are also asked to respond essentially to the minimum data set questions that kind of comprise the core of our survey. So by leveraging the eNotify data, and you'll see how many states that we were able to do that for in just a second here, we were able to analyze findings for more than 300,000 nurses located across the United States. Direct mail outreach, so that continues to be really the core of our focus in terms of outreach. That still returns the strongest response rate. That was conducted in 43 jurisdictions in partnership with our long-term kind of vendor partners in Scantron, while exclusively email-based strategy was employed in 4 jurisdictions. And for the remaining 5 jurisdictions, based on rigorous internal testing, we determined that the data collected through the nurse self-enrollment in the eNotify system was both of sufficient volume, but also, as important, of sufficient quality, that separate survey outreach really was no longer necessary. So, as I hope you have been able to review and read in advance of this presentation, the results of the survey were reported in a variety of formats, including detailed descriptive and graphical depictions as they typically are. But then with some of the targeted sub-analysis looking at the pandemic in particular, we also included some inferential statistics such as binary logistic regression and natural language processing. So, taken as a whole, this is kind of the end of the introduction a little bit, so to speak, for the survey. As a whole, we feel that this 2022 report represents the largest, most comprehensive and rigorous evaluation of the nursing workforce survey since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020 in the United States. We are, like many of you likely, eagerly anticipating HRSA's reported results. My understanding from coordinating with them a little bit is that that would hopefully maybe be by the end of the year or early into next. To date, we have published 2 reports from our findings with more to come. And if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to field that as well. The first was our typical overview and all-encompassing supplement. So if you have not had an opportunity to access that, I would highly encourage you to go to the Journal of Nursing Regulation. That report is free for download. It is in all of its glory. It's about a 70-page report where we go into detailed dives of both the RN and LPN, LVN workforces. This, as it has historically, provides a rich detail and a comprehensive description of all levels of the nursing workforce and detailed dives of every single one of our 39 survey items. The second, which was a more targeted sub-analysis, specifically examined the impact of the pandemic on the U.S. nursing workforce. So that's the information that I've included on the slide in front of you. I am very happy, Loretta, to share this deck with you following the conclusion of my presentation. So if anyone is interested for just simply reference purposes, they can access that after today's meeting. But what I would really kind of emphasize here is that our main publisher is Elsevier. So for those of you who are familiar with Elsevier's policy regarding COVID-19 related research, all of this information and data, not only that I'm presenting here today, but from our full COVID kind of research agenda, are free for download on the Nursing Regulation website. So all of that information is freely accessible. The primary objective for the sub-analysis was to identify the personal and professional characteristics of nurses experiencing heightened workplace burnout and stress. And in doing so, we hoped to really better understand the possibly differential impacts. That was kind of our hypothesis, and it was borne out in the data. But the differential impacts of COVID-19 on the nursing workforce based on select criteria: age, years experience, workplace setting, practice type, license type, etc. And then thereby to really inform in a targeted manner future policy meant to ensure a safer, more sustainable U.S. nursing workforce. So the idea wasn't to present kind of a one-size-fits-all panacea. We recognized that, folks basically practicing in different settings with different educational and professional experiences, different tenures within the nursing profession, etc., would be likely to experience the principal effects of the pandemic differently, and that is what we saw. So importantly, before I dive into some of the results here, I did want to mention when we get into the sub-analysis, because I think I emphasized pretty consistently that we capture data from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and select U.S. territories for the full survey. When we get into the COVID-19 sub-analysis, there were 5 jurisdictions that ultimately did not make it in to that particular sample. Those 5 states were Missouri, Wyoming, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Washington. And if the number 5 sounds familiar, it's because when we went through the methodology, I indicated that we used 5 states worth of eNotify data. So that eNotify survey framework that's associated with nurses' self-registration within the eNotify system only includes data elements associated with the minimum data set. So if you remember, the COVID-19 questions specifically, in addition to others, telehealth, the compact, etc., were designated as custom survey elements. So prior to the 2022 launch, if we were leveraging eNotify data, we did not have access to nurses' responses on those particular items. And that does come into play as we think about intent to leave and projections regarding retiring. Because if anything, even though our projections are a little eye-popping, I would argue, they are more likely than not conservative because they only include and project out nurses' responses from 45 states. So that's important to keep in mind. I do have good news on that side of things, though, and that is moving forward, we are fully aligning the eNotify survey framework with our overall National Nursing Workforce Survey. So moving forward, we won't experience the same limitation. For this sub-analysis, though, the numbers come down a little bit and are a little bit more aligned with what we traditionally see with our National Nursing Workforce Survey. So collectively, we were able to leverage information provided by over 30,000, or about 30,000, I should say, registered nurses, including advanced practice registered nurses, and then 24 licensed practical and licensed vocational nurses across those 45 states. Regarding the results, I like to begin by focusing really particular on what we have already lost, rather than essentially jumping ahead to what we project we might lose, absent some intentional policy. So let's focus first and foremost on the more than 250,000 of nurses that our survey was able to document have already left the workforce since 2020. So to set a baseline for this, we'd like to give you a sense or context for what we would have typically anticipated in that 2-year time frame in terms of attrition from the nursing workforce. So based on historic trends, when we look at new profession entrants from the NCLEX administration, when we look at retirees, etc., from 2020 to 2022, we would have anticipated, and this is a fairly consistent number, obviously as the number of folks taking and passing the NCLEX increases, this number is prone to shift a little bit, but generally speaking, it's been very, very consistent for a number of years now. We would anticipate about 150,000 RNs to have left in that 2-year period. What we actually documented, though, was 330,000 nurses, so more than double the number we would have expected under typical conditions. Further, our analysis, when we kind of dug deeper into the 330,000, what we found was that about a third of that total, or approximately 100,000 registered nurses in particular, left the workforce due specifically to the pandemic. So we asked them directly, did you ultimately elect to leave the profession, not just your position, right? That's an important distinction, the profession as a result of the pandemic, and 100,000 answered affirmatively. What was concerning when we continued to dig into that data point a little bit was that 41% of that total, so about 41,000 nurses, right? It's a nice round number at 100,000. 41% of that total was comprised of nurses with a mean age of 36 and fewer than 10 years work experience. So individuals that we would never anticipate, that would never be on our radar under normal conditions. The RN level attrition was then further compounded by approximately 34,000 licensed practical and vocational nurses, indicating that they left for similar reasons during the same time frame. When we dug into what were some of the drivers of those trends, I don't really think that this constitutes breaking news, but we found that high workloads, stress, and burnout were really the principal reasons provided by respondents. So overall, 62% of nurses at all levels reported an increase in their workload. And in addition, half reported feeling emotionally drained, used up, fatigued, and burned out a few times a week to every day. So that's important. It was a 7-point Likert scale. We isolated the top 2. So to fall into this category, to count toward the 45% or the 56% on both ends of the ranges, you had to indicate that you were feeling this level of emotional distress multiple times a week or every single day. So it's a very acute response. And then even potentially more concerning, while the proportion is lower, over 1/4 of the workforce reported feeling at the end of the rope at similar intervals. For these particular characteristics, these are kind of a roll-up aggregate accounting across all license types, because what we found was that the experience of increased workloads and emotional distress were very consistent across nurses of all license types. We then narrowed our gaze a little bit on these particular outcomes to understand what nurse or practice characteristics may be driving some of these larger trends. And what we really found again really reinforced some of those initial descriptive findings. And that was that nurses with 10 or fewer years of experience consistently reported 28 to 56% increase in the frequency of feeling emotionally drained, used up, fatigued, burned out, and at the end of the rope compared to their more experienced counterparts. And then similarly, nurses who reported an increased workload during the pandemic displayed similar patterns. So we decided to once again delve deeper into these trends related to years experience and increased workload in particular. And this is where we took the approach of a very rigorous multivariable analysis. So what do I mean by that? We collected a whole host of other characteristics, as I've laid out hopefully pretty clearly, on the demographic and professional profile of these individual respondents. So we were able to capture information and ultimately adjust our models or control for respondents' self-reported sex, ethnicity, race, salary, license type, indicators for full-time nursing employment, direct patient care, and even travel nurse designation. And even after we adjusted the models for all of those individual criteria, we found that the significant associations with years experience and increased workload not only remained constant, so essentially they were not moderated out by adjusting for those other demographic and professional characteristics, but further, there was an interaction between the two. And so just for the purposes of time, what I'll draw your attention to here is that we really wanted to understand for those nurses that were indicating that they were less experienced and experiencing a heightened workload, we compared them to their similar experienced peers with normal workloads, their more experienced peers with higher workloads, and their more experienced peers with normal workloads. And from the table that you can see in front of you, in every single comparison on those subgroups, we found that the least experienced nurses who were reporting heightened or kind of increased workloads consistently and significantly reported heightened experiences of feeling emotionally drained, used up, fatigued, burned out, and at the end of the rope. So this is compared to their similar experienced peers with normal workloads, and even their more experienced counterparts with similarly increased workloads. So again, just very, very consistent. Again, just for the purposes of time, we just wanted one of the three questions that we added for the COVID subset. We wanted to give nurses the opportunity to kind of organically share their experiences and narrow our gaze as to what was important in their own words as it related to their experience with the pandemic. And so what we were able to distill using a form of supervised machine learning and natural language processing was 5 salient topics. So you can kind of see that in front of you. The first one was COVID stress. That's obviously a very broad one. It turned out that the underlying criteria or topics that underlied that topic were similarly broad. So you could have comments regarding anti-vaccination, anti-public health intervention sentiments. Those were in the clear minority, to more commonplace concerns regarding PPE shortages, vulnerability to infection, and in particular, long-haul infection. Type 2, 3, or topic 2, 3, and 5, we would argue are more durable topics. They weren't necessarily, they were not drawn out from the experience of the pandemic, but rather exacerbated or kind of accelerated, so to speak, as a result of the experience through the pandemic. And then one of the specific topics that really emerged in the free text responses were conversation regarding retirement and career change. So the first one, actually here, I should take you back here really quick. So the other thing that I should note about this particular table is that we broke these responses out by license type. So you can see different types of nurses experienced different topics more acutely than others. For this particular field. For this one, it was effectively the exact same topics, but then broken out by number of years experience. And again, what we found was kind of a differential effect of what was kind of leading the stress or the emotional distress for the nurses, not based only on license type, but also based on years experience. And so this is really kind of the aha moment in terms of the results that we were able to distill from the sample. That is, looking ahead, we project about 800,000 registered nurses and 184,000 licensed practical and vocational nurses to leave nursing by 2027. So to put that into context, that is equivalent to roughly 20% of the current licensed RN and LPN, LVN workforces in the United States, respectively. And again, just for context, for the RNs in particular, that is more than double what we would project under normal conditions. So an important thing to keep in mind when considering these estimates and these results is that this is sampled research, right? So there is a margin for error. But when you think about it in that context, the margin for error is certainly not for an 800,000 estimate plus or minus 400,000, which it would need to be for us to get back to what we would anticipate under normal conditions. Further, one of the things to remind you of is that this number, this 800,000, this 184,000 LPN, LVN, so near a million total of the nursing workforce, is not inclusive of nurses in 5 states, in 5 jurisdictions. So almost assuredly, there would be some proportion of those state-based workforce. We did not impute any data. We did not feel as though for something like how personal the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic can be in particular, we did not feel it would be appropriate and or potentially very, very accurate to impute some of that information, try to project out at the other 5 state level. So rather, we just functioned from our own 45 state sample. And then the main caveat to this is these numbers are likely to be conservative when we take into account that there are some nurses who were not introduced to this topic and given the opportunity to respond. The final thing before I move off of this and we get into the implications a little bit is that of the 800,000, you'll see kind of a recurring theme in my presentation of the results is really focusing on that inexperienced younger cohort of nurses. For the 800,000, about 24%, so almost 200,000 of those RNs indicated based on their demographic or their response profile that they were younger than mean age 36 and had fewer than 10 years work experience. And so when they indicated that they were likely to leave the profession, again, not their position, to leave the profession in the next 5 years, they specifically cited emotional distress in the form of burnout and stress due to the COVID-19 pandemic specifically. So where does this leave us? High workloads, stress, and burnout over the last 2 years have obviously significantly strained the U.S. nursing workforce across all settings, practice types, ages, and experience levels. Further, it's a little bit outside the scope of today's presentation, but if you've seen any of the other work that we have published on this particular topics, and even just in your day-to-day experience, likely with nursing programs around the state of California, without question, the pandemic has also disrupted very significantly traditional educational models, nursing included. So as a result, this confluence of factors, we believe, is likely to contribute to critical staffing shortfalls and reductions in the practice readiness of new nurse graduates at a time when arguably more nurses than ever are needed to coordinate continued inpatient demand for and related to COVID-19 and an aging population. But with a caveat, these workforce projections that I've shared here today are not static, and we do not want them to be viewed that way. Rather, we think of these outcomes and these projections as manipulable outcomes depending on the decisions that policymakers ultimately make today and in the near future. And I think presentations like this and the forum that you are giving us today and the discussions like the ones that you're having today and likely tomorrow are absolutely essential to identifying and tailoring those policy solutions aimed at fostering a more sustainable and safer U.S. nursing workforce. So when we project out critical staffing shortfalls, that is very much within the context of absent intentional, well-funded, and carefully tailored policy. In the event that interdisciplinary stakeholders across the health professions in state legislatures and the federal government can come together and they can try to put some real solutions on the table, it is our hope that these numbers would come down. But with that, I will open the floor to any discussion that you have. I will attempt to stop sharing my screen here so that you are better able to see me. But I am open to any questions that you might have or need for clarification regarding those particular data points. And I'm also happy to speak to the rest of our COVID research agenda and or what we envision for our future work on this particular topic.
Board Member Patricia Nguyen.
Thanks very much. It's always kind of great to see context nationwide. I guess my question is, you said smart policy decisions could help, stanch this loss of nurses. What kinds of things are you talking about? What should this board be particularly aware of?
So I think that that's an excellent question. I think what we were able to document from the National Nursing Workforce Survey was that there was effectively a generational shift. So in the 330,000 nurses who have left the workforce in the prior 2 years, over 200,000 of that cohort were nurses who had opted to effectively retire, potentially sooner than they had anticipated. So we saw a loss really of that institutional kind of knowledge, so to speak. What was left in their wake were still younger, less experienced nurses who had acute experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic, potentially leaving them feeling a little bit more burned out and stressed vis-a-vis their historic peers. And then coming in behind for the new entrants, we're seeing, arguably from other studies that we've done, less confident and potentially less prepared new nurse entrants. So when you look at all of that, I think it's an all solutions on the table type of approach. So it's looking for some form of virtual nursing to potentially recapture some of that lost institutional knowledge from nurses who have potentially retired. We're looking for mental health services and intentional policy regarding making sure that the current workforce has what they need to continue to perform at the top of their license. We're talking about fully funded and formal transition to practice, kind of internships or residencies for new nurse entrants so that they feel confident and are able to, again, perform to the top of their license. And then going all the way down to the pre-licensure stage, you know, I think there needs to be significant efforts to not only retain, but also to attract new nurse faculty, to expand the number of clinical placements, a real attention and focus on what are the forms of remote learning. When I kind of speak to that, I'm talking about simulation that are effective and those that are potentially not yet there. So those could be distinctions between virtual simulation and high fidelity in-person simulation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really all solutions on the table. But having just rattled off that whole list right there, one of the things that I am quick to mention is that, you know, I am trained in statistics. My background is in research. And so when we do this type of work, what we endeavor to do is, to the best of our ability, accurately capture what are the potential problems and what are the magnitude of those problems. And then what we do is we give that information to the subject matter experts, to the nursing professionals who are leading to the charge, to have those conversations with their state policymakers, with, you know, their federal legislators, et cetera, you know, so that we can get movement on that. But, you know, the presentation of these results and the work that we do is really meant to make sure that when you all, as the leaders of kind of the nursing profession, are having these conversations, you are armed with the most up-to-date and accurate information possibly, identifying where the problems exist. And then it is really to the folks who are at the forefront of that policy to really enact the change that they think is both, you know, the best kind of tailored to the particular problems that they're experiencing, and that will kind of get ahead of certain things like intent to leave the profession. But I hope that helps, just in kind of a quick synopsis of what we envision across our entire range of COVID research studies as possible solutions.
Board Member Allison Cormack.
Thank you, Board Chair Trujillo. This is Allison Cormack. Dr. Martin, thank you very much for your presentation. First, I just have a comment to our staff. It would be great. He's referencing a 70-page downloaded thing. If we could get a link to that sent out, and even in advance would be ideal. That way we have a chance to review the information and not ask not ask more obvious questions. I wonder if you could tell me what your direct mail response rate was. You mentioned that was the highest in the study.
It was. So we had about a 20%, a little under a 20% response rate for RNs and LVNs, LPNs alike. The email response rate then fell to about 10 to, I think the range was 10 to about 13%. And so in total, we fell just a little under 17% for our aggregate, because again, the core of our responses were from that paper-based survey. So that kind of yanked the overall response rate up rather than the email yanking it down, so to speak.
20% is pretty high, yeah?
You know, it is for the current context. I will say when we started this survey, and for any of you who are familiar with survey research, if you go back even 10 years, you would have been hoping to get a response rate in the 30%, 30 to 40%. That would have been considered the standard. Increasingly, what we have found, and I think that this is validated across professions, is that the sheer volume of surveys that we all receive in our professional and personal lives has really just started to kill our life force, so to speak. And then on top of that, given that our primary unit of measurement in this particular analysis are nurses, right? That is a specialized group that, as you might anticipate, since the onset of the pandemic in 2020, and certainly all of the reports of burnout and stress, this is a particularly burdened group when you get into surveys. So we did view 20% as a very good number. The other thing that I would note is that while the response rate has fallen historically, we have been intentional in oversampling. So what does that mean? We survey more folks so that we always get the same number of responses pretty consistently. Where our survey numbers dropped off a little bit, that is directly attributable to the fact that we were not doing any survey outreach in 5 jurisdictions, right? So that's where our numbers come down a little bit because we leverage DeNotify data. But we consistently get the same number of raw responses, and then we do rigorous internal tracking and kind of non-response bias analyses to try to determine, are there gaps in what we're able to understand? And then as best as possible, if we perceive any, we adjust for them based on reported demographic criteria. In the event that we don't see any, we're able to just leverage what we have. And I'm happy to report very consistently since 2013, we have not seen any non-response bias trends that we feel as though would lead us astray in terms of some of our interpretations of the responses.
That's reassuring. Thanks for that level of detail. About how long is the survey?
So the survey instrument itself in total is 39 items. And as I mentioned, the core of that is composed of the minimum data set. That really comprises about 2/3 of the survey. And so then we otherwise try to keep most of our custom items not only narrow in scope, but also as simple in format as best as possible, because there are many items that do allow themselves to be asked in kind of simpler binary, like yes, no formats or fixed item response. So you think of a check all that apply. When in doubt, we eschew really free text or open-ended responses. I did mention one of our 3 COVID questions was so we would give kind of a forum or a platform for nurses to organically relay their own experiences of the pandemic. We felt that that was important, but given the amount of burden that that places on the potential respondent, we really try to remain fixed in kind of our fixed response questions. So 39 in total, 2 pages back and front. And I can actually attest to that because it is a direct mail survey. So we know what that looks like on the old school bubble form. And then in terms of what we anticipate in terms of a total time on task, it is about 10 minutes. Usually if you're going through it very efficiently and you don't have an opportunity, let's say you don't have a secondary position, for instance, it gets a little bit faster. The more information you have to bear, it can get up to about 10 minutes.
Well, that all seems reasonable. I haven't heard Scantron since I was in high school. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And yesterday I actually got a survey to evaluate the customer service of a request to get off their mailing list. I'm like, no, I'm not taking that survey. So, yeah,
Well,
people are overwhelmed by surveys.
And all joking aside, I've actually gotten to the point where some stores I'll leave and they obviously have some sort of electronic register associated with an app or something like that. Amazon, I think, is always the guilty culprit. If you go into one of those physical stores for Amazon, it will literally send you a survey as you leave the door. So, I mean, it works against us, I would say. But I think through kind of intentional outreach messaging, we can still attain things like a 20% response rate, which is nice.
Okay, I have a couple more questions for you and then a few for
Please.
staff. So I get that the 41,000 who left at the mean age of 36 with 10 years of work experience is alarming and concerning. Are you able to learn or correct for the fact that many parents and this might be a prime time for people to have young children, ended up leaving the workforce because they had to school their kids at home? Was there any effect of being a parent of young children?
Yes. So one of the items, and what I would note, so to your initial comments about the copy of the supplement. So for the overall analysis, that was that 60 to 70 page full supplement. Included in the appendix is the survey instrument itself. So we're very transparent about what we ask. The very first question that we ask is, what was the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on your employment status over the past 2 years, right? And so we give them opportunities to say things like, I just had to leave temporarily. I had to, I wanted to pursue higher education, right? I had personal reasons, I had family reasons, etc. One of the response options in that particular list was, I left specifically due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you selected that, then we had a whole host of kind of follow-up to that. So we did try to capture and tease out what were the kind of the many pulls really on all of us personally and professionally during that period of time. It's funny, your question actually strikes a personal chord, because my wife is a nurse of 9 years, and at the time we had a 2-year-old son. He actually turned 2 right after the pandemic was officially declared in the state of Illinois. And so we're very aware of the potential there that there could be kind of a temporary step back within the profession, and that can sometimes take a more kind of permanent look and feel and kind of a per diem shift in terms of their approach to their career. Or it could be, I'm going to step away for a few years, or it could be, I'm going to spring back actually pretty quickly. When we say that 100,000 fell into that category for the RNs, and then 41% of that, so about 41,000, fell into that younger cohort, that was specifically due to burnout. We were able to attribute that to burnout and stress associated with the pandemic. So we were able to isolate that in those circumstances, because as we have talked to others kind of within other health professions, we have seen some, like for instance in medicine, they have seen some evidence of kind of like a boomerang effect, where folks are now trying to kind of re-enter, and they're thinking about, how do we maintain professional standards, credentialing, etc. How do we make sure that that's all in place as they come back and re-enter the profession? We have not seen that yet within nursing, but we track very diligently when we project things like intent to leave, when we project things like stepping away for education. We track both the number of licensed workers, and we track how many of them are practicing full-time within nursing. We do this cyclically on a 2-year schedule. We also look at NCLEX pass rates. We try to consider all of these elements and then make sure that essentially we're holding our own feet to the fire regarding progress towards, some of these projections. So for instance, in 2022 or 2020, that was the first year we actually did an intent to leave question. And
that was prescient.
Yeah, so you would anticipate, right, that in 2020, projecting out 5 years, by 2022, what we had seen in terms of attrition in the workforce should be about 40% of what we were projecting at that period. We saw progress up to about 47% toward that projection in just 2 years. Now, the pandemic happened, right, and that was unforeseen. So there's a kind of a confounding element there. But one of the things that we try to do is we really try to make sure that when we're saying there's a potential here for 800,000 nurses to leave over a 5-year period, we're tracking that consistently internally so that we're making sure, well, where are we in that number? Recognizing that there are many inputs, and it's a point in time intent to leave, right? So that can vary over a 5-year period. But we are very intentional about trying to track it as diligently and accurately as possible to make sure that, we understand where we stand with that information.
That's really helpful to go into that level of detail. Thanks for that. And then I guess a question for the staff, and I don't know this yet because I'm new. How do nursing schools today train students for the mental health challenges of this demanding job? What are the requirements that we have for them?
Our board sets curricular requirements. We do not set any other requirements as in setting them up for mental health. That's not part of our regulatory authority at this point.
And does someone have that regulatory authority?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that when they look at an academic institution approval, some of ours go through the Chancellor's Office for CSUs or community colleges, or with the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education. within various academic institution laws and requirements, they do have student services. Those student services are a requirement that is not under our jurisdiction. So we do have MOUs with each one of those entities for them to be degree granting institutions. We do work in collaboration with them, but that is not something that we would do. If we were doing a visit to review a nursing program and we found that they did not have student services, we would then make that report to those agents, those agencies, and let them know that that was a finding. And then we would also discuss with the program director at the site to let them know that that is known to be a requirement as well. But the student services and what that entails is not under our jurisdiction.
Okay. And then I wrote down, this is my final one, sorry, this is a lot of information. I love data. So, you know, your comment, Dr. Martin, about trying to create a more sustainable and safer workforce triggers with me thinking about, you know, this information and then information we'll have later in the meeting about, you know, should we be starting programs, you know, as early as high school, makes me think we probably need to be looking at the life cycle of a nurse in a more holistic, straightforward manner in order to be able to make decisions at different points along the way. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, for that comprehensive survey and the results. I had a question regarding the 800,000, the number to leave the profession. Was there any, looking at that number, was there any area or part of the nation where one area within that number stood out more than another?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. So we, it's a little bit against our nature to try to start to disaggregate. We really view the power of this report as kind of like the national summary or taken in aggregate. What does it tell us about the profession? But the reason why that's such a good question is because given the sheer scale that we saw, so the overall proportion of folks who indicated that they intended to leave or retire from the profession in the next 5 years was about 28%. And so that was up by about 6 percentage points from 2020. And while that sounds like an incredible number, if you look into the literature on this topic, and it was actually included in our literature review for this particular sub-analysis, the national range as reported across specialties and as reported across other rigorously conducted studies is about 22 to 32%. So vis-a-vis certain other studies, we're actually a little bit low. I would argue our scope is likely the most broad. But because of that, we actually did at least break it down to kind of the region level. And what we found was that the results were incredibly durable and consistent. So there wasn't necessarily a particular pocket. We have seen evidence in some of our other research studies that folks who are located in kind of more urban or metro locales had a little bit more acute experiences with the pandemic. But knowing how durable that is, or you know, whether or not that's kind of an artifact of the past 2 years or current state of working, is a little bit more difficult to tease out. But broadly speaking, when we kind of think about it almost as like census regions, we did not see, for instance, like the Southeast was more problematic than the Midwest or something of that nature, which in a way was a little bit surprising because there was obviously kind of a patchwork approach to some of the issues related to the pandemic. But what we found was that there was a very consistent and problematic experience of the pandemic as it related to frontline nurses. So that actually was fairly consistent regardless of the region in which you were located. We then did not break it down to the state level, obviously, though that was the next, you know, obvious step. But we did not break it down to the state level. When we talk about projecting our observed trends to kind of population weighted national estimates, we are able to retain that power if we look at it in aggregate. When we get to the state level, you know, there could very well be a particular jurisdiction which has a potentially smaller number of respondents. And as a result of that, our margin for error, while not great, kind of does eclipse our margin for error for the national estimate. And so we don't pursue that at too great a level of detail because, as obviously you know, every jurisdiction has its own state nursing workforce center for the most part. And so they are likely consistently and in a very detailed fashion tracking similar data points. So we really leave that to our state partners at that instance. But great question. We typically don't look at it broken down beyond national. This year we did. And ultimately what we found was that the reported experience of the pandemic was very consistent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board members? Any other questions from the public member in San Diego?
There are no public comments here in San Diego.
All right. BRN moderator, can you please open it up for public comment?
We will be opening for public comment now. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Gerard Brogan would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
I think, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, so 2 minutes, I know. Well, thank you for that. My name is Gerard Brogan. I'm Director of Nursing Practice for National Nurses United. We too, like the National Council, have been surveying our members, and not just our members, frankly, nurses across the country. We've done several surveys, and interestingly, a lot of it gels with what you've put out, and thanks again for doing that. So what we're seeing, and it is relevant to retention of nurses, is a lot of moral distress. We don't like the term burnout. We prefer moral distress. And I know there's increasing literature on that. But what we see in our surveys is that the COVID pandemic has really exacerbated the inherent stress in this job. And again, and I think the National Council's previous documents would back this up. We're seeing the main reasons for nurses' cite for leaving are staffing, lack of support from administration, and workplace violence. Of course, we're an active organization, so we're moving on legislation on that. But I really want to stress that both anecdotally and through our surveys and surveys we see elsewhere, that they're the 3 main reasons. And we take no joy in saying this. Of course, a lot of this moral distress was caused by the complete disregard for nurses' health and safety and other healthcare workers for that matter during the pandemic. So we will continue to work on these issues. We believe there's not a nursing shortage currently. We believe there's a shortage of nurses willing to tolerate the egregious conditions in which they're working under. And thank you for my time on that.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no more public requests on the WebEx. Board EO Melby has stated there are no public requests in San Diego. Are there any public requests in Sacramento?
Yes, we have one.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hughes, a registered nurse and the executive director of the Nurse Alliance of SEIU California. We represent about 35,000 nurses here in California and 85,000 nationally. And Gerard kind of hit on a lot of the things coming from another nursing union. the pay issue is a huge thing, especially listening to EO Melby's report earlier regarding Local 1000 and their bargaining unit 17. The fact that they do not pay any of their nurses within the state employment anything that is remotely equitable or addresses the cost of living. Staffing is a huge problem. Here in California, we might have ratios, but CDPH did not enforce ratios during the entire pandemic, and we're still struggling and fighting to get them to do their job to support staffing, safe staffing. And our administrators don't support our nurses. You know, publicly they're throwing out banners during the pandemic about how healthcare workers are heroes, but they weren't treated like heroes within the facilities. And they're, you know, and we find our employers are using how we survived COVID to make a lot of those exemptions and things permanent. CDC right now is looking at lowering some of their infectious control or infectious disease standards, the 2007 guidelines, and saying that, you know, we can use surgical masks instead of respirators like N95s and things like that. So if we don't address all of those things in addition to, you know, the enrollment issue and practice readiness and everything, but if we don't pay them what they deserve, and if we don't staff them safely and provide allied health professional support within any of our facilities, these horrific numbers are only going to get worse. And I think part of the, you know, I've been in practice for 10 years or less, or I'm in the mid 30s range. They have a lot more employment opportunities to leave the profession, but they're also our future, right? Because we're all, I'm like counting the days to retirement. And I don't, you know, it's like, and I know my bedside nurses are doing the same thing, but the younger nurses are like, why the heck am I going to spend 20 or 30 years living and working in this hellhole when I'm young enough to try to find another career? And our patients, we just can't sustain that. So we really got to step up, and our employers really need to step up, and they need to treat us, all of us, like we're heroes and actually do something about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Carmen Comsty would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Everyone, I'm Carmen Comsty, Lead Regulatory Policy Specialist with the California Nurses Association, which is an affiliate of National Nurses United, Gerard's organization. You know, as the largest union of registered nurses in California, you know, everything that has been presented today about the NCSBN survey, you know, it really kind of solidifies the experiences that our nurses, our members have been, you know, they've lived through for the past 3.5 years. And I think, you know, as we know, our nurses, they've seen this in their workplaces for years, even before the pandemic. And I think what really has happened is that COVID has exacerbated this crisis of unsafe staffing and unsafe working conditions that is being driven by employer neglect of our healthcare workforce and intentional policies of short staffing. So I think, you know, on that question of what to do, what's the policy to do, you know, I would be behooved to forget to mention the work that the Nursing Education and Workforce Advisory Committee, as a member of that, that we're doing in terms of trying to answer the questions of like, how can we retain our nurses and create good permanent nursing jobs, and to ensure that our nursing students are fully trained and prepared to be in the workplace. And I think, you know, despite the fact that it's not necessarily everything isn't within the BRN's purview, I just wanted to highlight a number of the statistics from the most recent RN Workforce Forecast Survey, which I know all of you have looked at, but, you know, just kind of to highlight it here, which is that 38.1% of California registered nurses disagreed with the statement that, quote, my organization really cares about my well-being, end quote. And then 41.9% of RNs in our state disagreed with the statement that, quote, my organization responds to my complaints, end quote. And I think, you know, that really distills the pandemic related moral distress and moral injury and what is happening to our workforce. And, you know, I really appreciate the board's focus on this issue today. And you know, we look forward to working with you all more in the future as we try to figure out how to keep our nurses safe and protected on the job, and to end this crisis of moral distress and moral injury. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, are there any other public requests there in Sacramento?
There are no other requests here in Sacramento.
Thank you. There are none on the WebEx and none in San Diego. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please.
And then quickly before you leave, Brendan, I just wanted to thank you so much for presenting this information. We did have UCSD, which is our researcher that we contract, did a workforce presentation for our board in May. This is just continued information. It gives us more of a national look. Additionally, you will be back in November. And at the November board meeting, do you want to give us kind of a heads up of what you'll be presenting? It's pre-licensure, is that correct?
Yes, yes. So I'm happy to. So as you know well, Loretta, so two of the largest studies that we conducted in the past 2 years, one was the National Nursing Workforce Survey, which I presented the detailed findings today. The other was a national study of pre-licensure RN programs around the United States. So that ultimately took the form of a 2.5-year-long longitudinal study. So it was 2 years within program, kind of data tracking at the student and faculty level, and then 6 months into early career follow-up. Ultimately, we were able to capture over 4,000 course-based observations, hundreds and hundreds of early career observations for students who had attended 51 pre-licensure RN programs around the country. We had over 1,100 participants in that study. It was a wealth of information about the impact of the pandemic on pre-licensure education as well. So it's kind of the natural counterpart to our workforce survey. I presented that recently at our annual meeting at NCSBN, and I'm happy to come back in November and present that to the board as well. So it's a wealth of information, and I think really it only has an impact if we get it out there, as does all applied research. If it's all right, Loretta, could I just take a quick moment? Because I thought that those comments at the end, I just wanted to kind of circle back. I thought that they were very insightful. I would say in the presentation, you know, just to kind of be respectful of your time, I didn't dwell too much on it, but the 5 topics that we derived from our survey from nurses' free text responses, I would just go back and kind of note that 3 of them, one was unsafe staffing work environment, one of them was compensation, and one of them was feelings of underappreciated. So I would echo actually the comments that were shared after my presentation, and that is, by and large, were you to download the results of our sub-analysis for the impact of COVID on the U.S. nursing workforce, what you would see is we absolutely agree, and we feel as though our data support the fact that COVID wasn't necessarily always the driver of the issues at play and nurses' experience of kind of moral or emotional distress. It was more often an accelerant of more longer kind of standing and durable issues. We would agree with that interpretation. And then the other one, I think it was the second commenter, made the point about one of the things that's of critical concern about you losing those younger, less experienced nurses. And it is exactly in line with our thinking, which is really not only about the acute in the kind of the current period and projecting out over the next 5, but it's the loss of potential of somebody who potentially could have contributed to that workforce in a meaningful manner, really maintain patient safety standards, delivered on high quality patient outcomes for 20 to 30 years. And would have constituted effectively the backbone of the industry for the next, few decades. And so it's that loss of potential that was particularly striking to us as a possibility. Again, I think with policy, I think we could turn some of this around, but absent that, it's the potential loss of potential there. So I just wanted to say that, our findings do align with many of the other comments. And overall, I very much appreciate this opportunity. I look forward to coming back in November.
Thank you. And that will help us round out the picture here. So I appreciate that. I look forward to your November presentation. Additionally, just for everybody's transparency, I said UCSD, I meant to say UCSF. That is who we partner with for our research and data. Joanne Spetz is probably listening and saying, no, you said that incorrectly. So I wanted to make sure that that was addressed. And in her research that she published, she came up with some of the similar recommendations on how to address workforce. And that was to address more than just preparing nurses and getting them into the profession, but which is what under our jurisdiction, but how are they supported once they are there? And so thank you guys very much. And thank you, Brendan, and we'll see you in 3 months.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next agenda item. This is item 5.5. This is also information only. Presentation by the Department of Consumer Affairs, Internal Audit Office on the State Leadership Accountability Act. SLAA.
Yes, thank you. Also commonly referred to as SLAA by some of our internal members. It is a report that is on our website. If you go to rn.ca.gov and you'll go down into what's new, and typically you'll find it listed there, and it might have just been updated and removed because I'm not finding it there. So I will make sure to reach out and get that updated so that it is easier to access on our website now that I was not aware that it was moved. In addition to that, we do have Dedang on the line here, and he will take over this presentation and be here to answer any questions that you guys might have from this.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So before I start, I would like to ensure my partner Hong No is also available.
He is up here.
Give me a second while I'm attempting to share my screen. All right. Right, is everybody can see the screen? Yeah, okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, thank you again for inviting me to the Internal Audit Office. My name is Dadang Prihadi. Along with me is a audit supervisor from Internal Audit Office. His name is Hong No. And again, we will be talking about the overview of the State Leadership Accountability Act. Now, first, I want to cover the authority and the background. SLAA was originally enacted as a Financial Integrity and State Managers Accountability Act of 1983, or we commonly call them as a FISMA. Now, in the 2015, the name change to a State Leadership Accountability Act is to clarify the FISMA's applicability to operational, programmatic, and administrative activities, and to reinforce the responsibility of the management. The law requires entity management to establish and maintain effective system of internal control. Now, what is the law? The law is a Government Code 13,400 to 13,407. It is enacted to reduce the waste and strengthen internal control under guidelines provided by the Department of Finance. The SLAA requires that the DCA board, bureaus, and the commission to report on the adequacy of the entity's internal control and monitoring practices by December 31st of the each odd number year. It is applicable to operational, programmatic, and administrative activities. As you can see, there's a chart in front of you right now. Now, what this chart is that is compiled from Department of Finance from all of the last 3 reporting cycle of the SLAE report from all of the EATs of the department. This is the top 5. As you can see, it has been pretty consistent among majority of the categories, but one is stood up, is the pandemic. So the blue color is from 2021, beige is from 2019, and the green is from 2017. The pandemic risk shoot up in 2021 is because we all know that the state of California went into the emergency mandate from the government at the time. And there's a lot of the risk related to pandemic that was reported by the department. Majority of them is related to the teleworking because we all have to send home and work from home at that time. However, the other risk on the top is still consistent from the last 3 reporting, which is the staff, key person dependency, and the workforce planning. As California keep on experiencing the shifting in the workforce from baby boomer, Gen X, and millennial, I think this is gonna stay for a bit. The rest of them, technology, funding, and staff, I think we will start seeing that too, especially for the funding, as California also budget is keep on up and down, as we all know as well. So we will be also talking about the process and the roles. The reporting process itself, as we know, that the SLAE has 2 major cycles, really. Number 1 is the initial report. And this has to be reported on every odd year. And we are due for one, which is on the December 31st this year. And the next one is actually what we call as a SLAE implementation plan. And that is due every 6 months after the initial report is compiled and submitted to the Department of Finance. So what is the initial SLAE report itself? We have to identify the highest risk for the boards, right? So every board, bureaus, and the programs, we all have to identify that. We have to put it all together, and we have to submit it to the agency head, which is the executive officers. Once that's done, our role as an IAO, which we will touch base later on, is to help to facilitate all of the SLAE report from all of the boards, bureau, and the program. Put it all together. We're going to go through the review process from the DCA as well as our agency. Now, once it's all done, then we have to submit to the DOF, to the SLAE web portal. Now, this SLAE web portal, typically DOF open it up starting from October 1st. So it's about 6 weeks from now. In the meantime, there is a lot of information out there that the Department of Finance is also sharing as well, including the template, risk categories, right? So by the time we are done, agencies approve it. Now it is the board responsibility to post it on the DOF website. Now this is going to be a public report. It's going to have to be posted on the board's website, as well as the DOF will have the archive of all of the SLAE report that has been posted and submitted to them. In this case, in the last 4 years, DOF has a link. This we will provide it at the end of this handout. They put the SLAE report from the 2015, 17, 19, and 2021. Once we have submitted the SLAE report, the initial SLAE report, this is when the SLAE implementation plans comes in, which is every 6 months. So what it does is that from all of the risks, no matter how many, we could be 3, 4 to 15, 16, depending on the number of the risks that was that we include in the initial report, we have to make a corrective action plan. We have to provide an update regularly every 6 months. So that is what the SLAE implementation report is. Again, it has to be submitted by the agency head from the executive officers, submitted again to the Department of Finance to the SLAE web portal. Unlike the SLAE initial report, the SLAE implementation plan does not have to be posted on the website. It is for the use by the entity only, in this case by the board. Now, if there's any outstanding risk at the end of this 2-year cycle, right? So let's say in the 2025, can the board use some of the risks again to be reported on the next SLAE cycle? Yes, the answer is yes, they can. However, it is up to the board as well to say, accept the risk and say, hey, within 2 years, we have done everything that we could. We have implemented a lot of corrective action plan. However, we felt like this has to be posted because we have done everything that we can. And that is possible as well. And DOF does give that full control to the entity. And I will hand it over to Hong No to talk about our role, IAO role, as well as the board executive role.
Thank you, Dadang. Good morning, BRN committee and members of the public. From the internal audit office role standpoint, right, we serve as the department's coordinator and point of contact with the department finance. We primarily provide advice or consulting support services to the DCA and board. So we'll try to address any questions or concerns that boards may have. Then we'll coordinate the draft reporting process, including the review of the SLAE draft report and the implementation plan with the internal audits committee and also agency, right? And then once the SLAE report is approved by agency, we'll help facilitate the submission to the DOFS or the Department of Finance SLAE portal. As the SLAE liaison, we'll retain copies of the SLAE report and also the implementation plans. From the board executive officer role standpoint, some of the responsibility include drafting of the SLAE report, which will identify and document the risk at the board. The board officers would develop the SLAE implementation plans to include each identify risks to ensure the risks are properly controlled and monitored. And they are required to report on their progress made of each risk to show what efforts were made to mitigate those risks. And also they are all responsible for submitting the draft report and the implementation plan to our office for review. The officers are also required to, respond to any questions that we may have, or the department may have, or finance or agency. Then once the reports were approved, they're required to submit the SLAE report and also the implementation plan to Department of Finance via their SLAE portal. And also post the SLAE report on their board's website. Just an FYI that the implementation plans are not required to post on the board's website, just the SLAE report itself. In terms of deadlines, as you can see here, December 31st, the SLAE report, which kickstarts the cycle, the new cycle, needs to be submitted to the finance SLAE portal. So we would need the SLAE draft report be submitted to our office somewhere around the end of October. That'll give us the committee and also agency time to review the report and approve it. So once that report it's approved by the agency, the board will submit that final report to DOF by December 31st. And then by June 30th, 2024, that's where the SLAE implementation plan will be due and need to be submitted to the SLAE portal. And then every 6 months, December 31st, 2024, and up until June 30th, 2025, those implementation plans are required to be submitted on those due date. And then December 31st, 2025, the biennial cycle will restart again. And that I'll pass it back to Dadang to go ahead and finish up the rest of the information.
So, and thank you, Hong. So as I mentioned earlier, we also include some of the additional resources. So we include the DCA 2021 SLAE report, and the DCA ourselves. We will start gathering and aggregating all of the risks that we see that we can report for this year cycle as well. And we also have put a link for the other entities for all of the SLAE reports. This is include all of the departments, and BRN is one of the entity as well from this link. The other one is the SLAE risk catalog. This risk catalog is developed by the Department of Finance and listing all of the risk categories to help each of the entities to categorize some of the risks, as you can see in the charts. So This is our contact informations. Again, my name is Dadang Prihadi, and along with me is an audit supervisor, Hong No. And I will believe that will conclude our presentation, and we'll be opening up for the questions and answers sessions. And I will stop sharing the screen.
Thank you for that presentation. Board Member Trisha Nguyen?
Thanks very much. I appreciate very much this, kind of overall oversight on these boards and commissions. And I was a little surprised by the statewide risks. There were a couple that I thought might have been a little bit higher. Loretta, I would like to just ask you specifically, so BRN has provided input into this process. So are our identified risks similar to the identified risks that are reflected in this chart?
Yes, correct. They are. We actually, Yvonne Leonard Taps is, as our Assistant Executive Officer, she spearheads the SLEA report for us. And what she did was take a look at several pieces